Good morning. How are you this morning? Feeling a little rough. I was up most of the night, had some guys banging on my door, waking me up in the middle of the night, telling me that the redcoats were coming. It's April 18th, morning April 19th, 1775, and the redcoats are coming. So we're going to talk about today the Paul Revere's ride and the battles of Lexington and Concord. Paul Revere was made famous by a poet by the name of Longfellow, but Revere's ride was not done alone. He had, officially, he had William Dawes, and Revere went by sea and rode over to the mainland out of Boston, and Dawes rode a horse and went the other way and rode out of Boston and then around Cambridge and up to Lexington and Concord. They met in a town called Mystic, not to be confused the town that I live in Mystic, Connecticut, but this was Mystic, Massachusetts at the time. They met up and they rode off to Lexington. Now they had two goals. Colonel Joseph Warren, who was the head of the Sons of Liberty and very influential in Boston, had gotten word through a spy that the British were going to mount a force and they were going to go arrest John Hancock and Sam Adams, who had left Boston and gone to Lexington. And they also got word that in Concord there was a collection of munitions, gunpowder, cannon, muskets, and they were going to march to Concord and they were going to burn those munitions. So the two of them, Dawes and Revere, ride off and they're waking up people, and they never said the words, "the British are coming," because at that time everybody was British. You were an American citizen, but you were British. It was more like perhaps he said the redcoats are coming because the British wore red coats as part of their uniform. So they rode off. They rode to Lexington, arriving there on the morning of April the 19th. They were met there by some guards in the boarding house that where Adams and Hancock were staying, and told to be quiet because they didn't want to wake up the two guests. And Revere is quoted as saying, "Noise, you will hear noise from the redcoats as they approach." And in fact, the redcoats weren't very far behind. Once they woke up all of the people in Lexington, they took off for Concord to warn those people. And they were joined by a third person, Dr. Prescott, who was visiting Lexington at the time. And the three of them rode off, and about halfway to Concord, they're stopped by a British patrol. And they're held there. And so what happens is Prescott is the only one that's really familiar with the area. So Prescott rides off in one direction on his horse. He escapes. Revere rides off in the other direction, and William Dawes, he doesn't know where he is or what he's doing, and he just runs into the woods. Well, Prescott continues on to Concord, and he's the one that really delivers the message to Concord. It is not Paul Revere. Paul Revere is captured again, held for a couple of hours, and then finally released, but way too late to make any impact on warning the people in Concord. So you have Prescott warns all of the people in Concord. The militia wakes up and they prepare for the British to come. The British arrive in Lexington. They're met there by about 70 to 80 militiamen, Minutemen. They were named Minutemen because they could be prepared for battle in a very short time, usually about a minute. So anyway, they're met there. There's really no written statistical proof or anything that talks about who fired the first shot, but a shot is fired, and the British open up and they start firing, and it is reported that they fired over 200 times, and they killed 8 militiamen and wounded a number of others, and only one of the redcoats is killed. And it's disheartening because they wanted to accomplish this without any harm to anyone. But Hancock and Adams are said to have been observing the event from a hillside, having gotten out of the boarding house that they were staying in. So the redcoats now are done in Lexington, and we have the shot heard around the world, and they march on to Concord. Well, they get to Concord, they start searching for munitions, and they start burning these munitions. And so the outlying Minutemen see all the smoke and stuff, and they think that Concord is being burned. So they arm up, they start towards Concord, and the fires get out of hand, and some of the houses burn. And so now they're very upset that the redcoats are demolishing the town of Concord, which wasn't the case, but they did do a lot of damage and stuff. So there's a short battle there, and the redcoats decide it's time to go back to Boston. And so they start marching back, and the Minutemen no longer take the traditional battle stance, which is in the old days you had opposing forces forming lines and facing off at each other, and really it was a matter of attrition. Who had the most men won the battle. So now they've reverted to their Indian warfare, as they like to call it, hiding behind trees, behind rock walls and stuff. And the march back to Lexington is brutal. The militiamen are taking a heavy toll. The British meet up with some reinforcements in Lexington, and it's only a 16-mile march from Lexington back to Boston. And the militiamen are on both sides of the road, and they're just annihilating the British forces the whole way back. And British forces are taking their coats off, dropping their guns, and running because so many men are being shot. And so the retreat to Boston is one of the bloodiest of all the battles in the Revolutionary War because of the way that it was fought. Finally, they're getting close, and a militia team, company out of Salem is kind of like the last of the militiamen guarding the road. And the commander of that force sees all of the hurt, the wounded, and tells his men not to fire. Had he ordered them to fire, probably would have annihilated what remained of the British forces. But he chose not to, and the British forces made it back to Boston, reported to the superiors what had happened, and hence you had the shot heard around the world, the battles of Lexington and Concord, and the start of the American Revolution. It was bloody. All told, there was about 200 militia killed, over 800 British killed or wounded, and was not what the British wanted, and proved once again that the militiamen were going to be an adversarial force to deal with. So there you have the battles of Lexington and Concord, and a little short on Paul Revere's ride. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. The lanterns from the Old North Church will tell you how it goes.